From the Central Western Washington area, Choice Regional Health Network presents the Equity Circle podcast, a place for information with integrity, accountability, and innovation. Enjoy the episode. All right, everyone, welcome to the Equity Circle podcast. Excited to be here today as we start. Going to be having Dr. Krager on again. We're really excited to have him on. He's been a frequent guest on the podcast. And so I don't know how much introduction is needed, but Dr. Krager, welcome.
Thanks, Lawrence. It's good to be back.
Well, thank you again. I really do appreciate it. So today, one of the things we're going to be talking about is we want to talk about the COVID vaccine for kids under 5. I know that there has been a lot of focus on making sure kids 5 to 11 are getting vaccinated. That's been some previous conversations that we have had on the podcast. And so with other guests, but now that, we really are starting to look at moving forward with the vaccine for kids under 5. That's really why I wanted to hopefully talk to you today and do some education for myself as well as our listeners. I have a 2-year-old, and so this is kind of helpful for me to know, where things are at and to get kind of an idea. So,
yeah.
So before we get into that, though, I would love to talk about how things are going for the vaccine for kids 5 to 11. I know that was the most recent to be approved. And so can you just talk about the effectiveness of that and kind of where we're at with that right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have the trial data from the trial for Pfizer for that age group, which showed a 90% effectiveness in preventing COVID-19, which is pretty good. So, close to what we saw kind of at the beginning of the vaccines when they first rolled out to adults. So that means, you get 2 groups of kids. One of them gets the vaccine, one of them then doesn't. The group that gets the vaccine, they're 90% less likely to test positive for COVID-19 in that time frame that they looked at it. So we're still waiting for data, more complete data on like hospitalizations and deaths and that sort of thing, and a little more real world data on effectiveness for these vaccines. But we expect, we've seen it repeated over and over with basically every group that has been vaccinated. You are well protected from severe disease when you get even more protected than even just get, protection from infection. So I expect that we'll have that kind of very similar data with kids 5 to 11 who've been vaccinated. The other thing that I want to kind of bring to people's attention is the CDC did analyze safety data a couple of weeks ago for about 8 million, a little over 8 million kids that in that age group across the country who have been vaccinated. So, and what was, while a trial will enroll, thousands of kids and test them, there's still a chance, you could miss something. And when you vaccinate, 8 million kids. And it was really reassuring. So, all the things we talk about with vaccines in general, getting a fever, getting a sore arm, feeling a little crummy, those were certainly common, about as common as we've seen with other age groups. Sure. But what was more important was, any serious effects were incredibly rare. So the main concern we'd had was with some young adults, the slight, very, very rare, but, slight increased risk of myocarditis, which is a type of heart inflammation. It's actually more likely to get it if you get COVID-19, but still a tiny risk of getting it for, younger males, especially getting vaccinated. We hardly saw any of that. I think it was 8 total cases out of that 8 million. So on a 1 in a million chance, which honestly, myocarditis just happens sometimes. It happens from other viruses. It can happen from COVID-19. It's hard to say whether that was tied to the vaccine or not. That was really, that was good to see that. And part of that, dose for that age group was also lower than the adult dose. So maybe that was part of it. And that's why we kind of play with those dosages. You want to give the least amount of medicine that will still have the most beneficial effect. So that's what's happening with vaccines as well. So, I am waiting to see some more effectiveness data, especially around like hospitalization and maybe preventing something like MIS-C, which is that inflammatory syndrome in children,
right?
Or preventing like long-term symptoms of COVID, which we have seen in kids. Those, that kind of that study is ongoing, and hopefully we'll have some more data soon.
So it sounds like overall, though, from preliminary things that you've shared, that it's fairly effective. I think you said 90%, and there's a lot of hope in terms of this vaccine and what you're seeing again and again for adults now, kids 5 to 11.
Yes. Yeah. No concerns about effectiveness or safety in that age group.
So for one, that's really encouraging, and it's really, good to hear that, because, as we've talked about different vaccines that have come down from, adults, now to kids 5 to 11. And, we kind of moving towards the under 5 now. And so I'm kind of curious, as we start talking about that, where are the clinical trials in terms of approval for emergency authorization use? And wonder if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, so there's 2 companies doing trials in kids, so Moderna and Pfizer. And my understanding is that they're both actually in fairly similar places where they may have, they're kind of wrapping up their trials in the next month or so. So, sometime in the next month or two, they should be able to be finished with, most of their trial data and submit that. Kind of once they feel like, it's complete, then they submit it to the FDA. And then the FDA takes time to review that data. In the past, it's taken a month or so for them to review data before authorizing a vaccine. So that's kind of what I would expect in terms of timing. But yeah, the real question is, where, when are they going to be done with those trials? And that's, no one knows for sure, but yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I have a 4-year-old who I'd love to get vaccinated, and a 1-year-old. So the sooner that can be done, and I can, have that confidence that they can be vaccinated, the better. I know a lot of parents are waiting for that as well.
So it kind of sounds like from what you're saying there, that Pfizer and Moderna are in a similar place when it comes to the clinical trials. Do we know a lot about maybe some of the effectiveness of the vaccine for that age group, and kind of like some of the preliminary numbers that they've ran in terms of people that received the vaccine and some that didn't? And yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that data has not been released yet. So we do know, so Pfizer had an interesting, I don't know if it's like a setback, but they vaccinated a number of kids in that age group. There were no safety concerns, but when they measured antibody levels after 2 doses, they weren't quite as high as they were hoping. So what they decided to do is add a 3rd shot. So just make it a 3-shot series like we see with other vaccines. And so they haven't released, what antibody levels. They just said that it was, not quite what they were hoping. But really the only way you can go is up. And so the hope is that, just adding that 3rd dose will be enough to boost that immune system and have an adequate response. So we haven't seen the efficacy data, but we have a better understanding now of, an antibody level and how well that might protect you, right? So we should, what the companies will do is kind of measure the antibody levels in kids and have a pretty good idea of whether that'll be protective or not. And then obviously they'll see in their trials as well if how many kids who were not vaccinated got COVID-19 and how many did who were vaccinated. So that data, that's really what everyone wants to see, like, and that's what will have to be it'll have to be good enough to get authorized, right? It'll have to show, it'll have to demonstrate that it's actually efficacious. So hopefully, they have a good result from adding that third dose. Moderna, I think is sticking with a 2-dose series. So, and I haven't read any concerns about that on the Moderna side, but they said they expect to release data kind of like early March, so a little over a month when that trial for Moderna would be done, at least for the 2 to 4 age group.
Okay, so that was one of my questions, was kind of figuring out, how are they distinguishing the different age groups? Is it like, now that it was 5 to 11, you mentioned 2 to 4. Yeah. Is there like a younger age that they're going from there, below 2 to 4?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Pfizer is, they're both doing younger age groups. So 2 to 4 is kind of one breakdown, and then 6 months to 2 years is the other one. So they're kind of looking at them in different trials, essentially. And Moderna is interesting because they're actually trying a couple different dosages among the same age groups. So a couple of the age groups are getting, different dosages even within them. So not even just with the different age groups. So and my understanding is that both Pfizer and Moderna will have that data on 2 to 4, probably a little bit sooner than the 6 months to 2 year age group. But from what I hear, the younger age group, kind of infants and to 2 years, would not be that far behind. So again, I know a lot of parents are really eager to get as much news as possible. So hopefully, I think you can hope, maybe late February, early March, we'll at the very least have data submitted, and then hopefully have a decision pretty soon from the FDA for those age groups. And then, start, I think it's possible we could start vaccinating kids in March, maybe April. There's a lot of kind of variables that go into that, but I think that's a kind of reasonable time frame.
So it sounds like it's a conservative guess, but we could be looking at March or April for vaccinations for kids.
It is possible.
It's possible. Certainly, things could change. And so I understand that. But of course we want it to be done right and safely. And, if there are things that need to be changed, you were kind of talking about it was Pfizer realizing that maybe 3 doses instead of 2 would be better. And so, so that's been really helpful to kind of understand, how things are going with the vaccine for kids. I'm just wondering, you've kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of like Pfizer and Moderna and, how they're going about dosages, and the difference there. But can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe how that compares to even kids 5 to 11, and what the dosage looks like there?
Yeah. So right now, only Pfizer is authorized for people under the age of 16. So for the 5 to 11 age group for Pfizer, their dose is 10 micrograms is what how they measure it. Adults, it's 30. So it's quite a bit smaller. For the younger groups, both age groups, both the kind of infant age group as well as 2 to 4, they're going with a 3 microgram, so about a third of what the 5 to 11 dose is. So pretty small, and again, trying to minimize, potential side effects, and still have an effective vaccine. So that's what it looks like for that age group. Moderna, it's less clear, but it sounds like they're doing slightly larger dosages, both 25 and 50 in kind of all age groups. So, they may land on one where 25 was effective, had less side effects, so we're gonna stick with that. But we'll see, and hopefully, that's the goal. A safe, effective vaccine that you can get away with kind of as small of a dose as possible.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful. And, I think there's, based on this conversation, there seems to be a lot of hope for the future and for a potential to have some vaccine rollout within the next few months. It certainly is a possibility and something that we would hope to have, as we talk about getting the vaccine out and continuing to try to move forward in this pandemic. So I'm kind of curious, as we come to a close today, Dr. Krager, what sort of encouragement, being a parent yourself, what encouragement can you give to parents as to why they should consider getting their kids vaccinated? And you talk about why it's necessary. I know that, it's definitely for some that are eager and some just want to know more about, before making that decision. And so if you could talk about what encouragement you give to parents, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a great question. I try to talk to parents a lot and hear people's concerns. And I hear a couple things, right? The one is just, COVID doesn't seem to affect children that much. So it's not a big deal if they get infected. And to that, I guess what I think about is other diseases that we have vaccines for. So, some we've basically eliminated, like polio, obviously cause more severe disease, but is basically not around. But then there's other ones like whooping cough, right? Whooping cough, also called pertussis, puts a lot of kids in the hospital, but less than COVID-19. COVID-19 has been putting a lot of children into the hospital. And actually, unfortunately, especially with this Omicron surge, we've had a lot of kids infected, and hospital rates kind of across the country are the highest they've ever been for kids. Obviously, yes, overall, their risk is low, but the other thing I tell people is if we had this like new virus that was only affecting kids and sending, hundreds of them across the country to the hospital and hundreds of them unfortunately dying, we would be panicked as parents, right? We would, but we're just making this comparison with how deadly it is for older adults and then kind of minimizing it for children. And I think that's kind of the wrong approach. I think we need to understand, as a parent, I would do anything, even if, overall the risk is small. If I can reduce that risk somehow of, with my kid ending up in the hospital. I was just reading a pediatric infectious disease doctor talking about all these kids that are, a lot of them currently eligible to get vaccinated, all the kids in his hospital that he's seeing in the ICU, intubated, on a breathing machine, they're all unvaccinated. And that could have been prevented. So, that's kind of what I think about as like, I would feel awful if my kid, got sick enough to have to go to the hospital. And especially if I knew I could have done something to prevent that. The other piece of that is, well, people are saying, what about safety? We don't know long-term safety. I read about all these things on the internet and people are worried. And I get that, but we actually have really good safety data on these vaccines. And they are incredibly safe. And the other thing I talk about with people, like, and I don't get a chance to talk about it a lot, but, just thinking about what happens when your body is infected with a virus versus what happens when you get a vaccine. Your body's infected with a virus. Your body can get overwhelmed. Cells are being infected and then destroyed. Inflammation is kind of happening throughout your body. All these things that can go wrong can go wrong. And it's a risky thing to get infected with a virus, especially one like COVID-19. a vaccine has a very it has a very kind of limited role in what it can do. It goes inside a couple cells. It causes our body to make antibodies, and that's about it. Not a lot else is going on. There's not a bunch of inflammation happening that destroys cells. It's in general just a much kind of safer, calmer process for your body to go through. So that's why it's safer. That's why we do it. We're giving, a tiny piece of the virus instead of the whole virus, and to teach our body, how to respond to it and kind of how to fight it. And so in general, it's just a much, easier process for your body to go through and less risk of something bad to happen. So that's kind of what I talked through. It reduces the risk of infection and hospitalization. And that's true for kids as well as adults. And they've been shown to be incredibly safe. And, obviously we'll review that safety data when we get it for the younger kids, which hopefully we'll get that soon and make sure that everything looks okay. But yeah, I mean, once it's approved, my kids, will be lining up too to get vaccinated, and I will have a lot more peace of mind. I'm not over the moon, like worried right now at this time that if they got COVID-19 that they would get really sick, but it's still there. I know the risk is small, but it's enough that I still worry about it. And so I'm really looking forward to having that peace of mind that, I've reduced the chance of something bad happening and my kids are more protected.
Well, it sounds like it's a simple, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but just prevention, tool, something that really just provides that sense of safety, right, and security, but also, physically is helping, their body and fighting off anything, and so I think just having that tool, it's similar to, you don't expect to get in a car accident, but you always wear your seatbelt, and you just something that's is a prevention tool, I guess, is what I'm trying to share, and so my hope is that, people would consider it. And I really have appreciated you just coming on and being able to explain what we know now. I know that, as we record this, it's January 27th, but, as time goes on, I'm sure we'll find out more, and hopefully, like you said, get some more safety data and information, so we can hopefully roll out these vaccines. So, Dr. Krager, I really just want to say thank you again for coming on the podcast. We really have appreciated your insight and your wisdom, and thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you to our listeners as well for listening to another episode of the Equity Circle podcast. We've been listening to Dr. Krager talk about the vaccine for kids under 5 and where we're at right now. Please share with friends and family. And lastly, remember that equity equals progress. Thank you.